Looks like our participant numbers are up, and it is now 6:05, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Folks can still trickle in, and we will accommodate those folks who are trickling in. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to join this webinar, where we're going to be doing an orientation information session around the Abolitionist Place public art project that I have been commissioned to do. So it's January 24th, 2022, not 2021, as I mistakenly wrote before. I'm Kameelah Janan Rasheed, and I'm really excited that folks were invested enough to come out remotely on this computer screen to be part of this conversation. So I'm just going to go over a couple of things before we get started and then jump to the presentation and try to leave most of the time that we have with each other today for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. So just some quick norms and reminders. The session is being recorded. We want to make sure that folks who are unable to make it this evening have the opportunity to see the session. This is one of several sessions that we'll have. We're going to have another one on February 7th, and then I'm just going to schedule several other Q&A opportunities for whoever wants to have a Q&A. If you have questions during this time, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That Q&A button will create a queue of questions for me. And when we get to the Q&A, I'll be able to go straight down the queue of the questions in orderly fashion, so we can make sure that everyone's questions get responded to and that everyone has a chance to pose a question. Some norms and reminders. When we get to the Q&A, just reminding folks to ask concise questions. We don't have a lot of time here, so I want to make sure that everyone who has questions has the opportunity to ask said questions. Also asking folks to be mindful of your airtime. If you've already asked a question, make space for others to join in. And remember that this is not the only time that you can contact me, as I'll share again at the end. You can call me, you can email me, you can fill out a form. There are several ways to contact me, so this will not be the only opportunity. Also, think about norms and reminders. We're all trying to have conversation around something that can be difficult to discuss when it comes to public history. So asking all of us to both assume positive intent, but also to be mindful of our assumptions. So using the questions as an opportunity to clarify. So what are we doing here today? So some of our objectives for today, and I'm sure many other things will come up, but the three core objectives are to introduce the public art portion of the Abolitionist Place project, to share the public engagement opportunities, and to respond to community questions about said project. So just a bit of an agenda for our time together. We have 1 hour together. And again, like I said, I want to spend most of this time responding to folks' questions. Our agenda is an overview of Abolitionist Place and just describing what it is as a project, and then talk through some of the concerns that folks have expressed about the project and my proposal in specific, an overview of the artist, that's me, an overview of the proposal, and then an overview of the public engagement. And again, we will save 20 to 30 minutes at the end to do Q&A. And at any point you have questions, just please drop them in the Q&A. Press that button at the bottom, and I will make sure I go straight in line from that queue. So, overview of Abolitionist Place. I'm imagining most folks who decide to come to this have some context, which is why you might be here. So this is not going to be an in-depth overview. This is literally me discussing it within a contemporary context to provide some context around the actual location. So this is taken directly from the EDC website, and it just explains that Abolitionist Place will be a 1.15 acre street level public open green space in the heart of downtown Brooklyn, half a block from the vibrant Fulton Street Mall. And so the way that I always think about this is I think about Albee Square Mall, and that's how I provide some geographic context for myself. Further on the EDC website, it outlines the project as part of the Downtown Brooklyn Redevelopment Plan, a set of space and infrastructure commitments made in 2004 to reinvigorate the neighborhood and celebrate the area's unique heritage. This is taken again directly from the EDC's website describing Abolitionist Place. This is the actual image, sort of like a drawing of the location, with some sort of features that identify seating, sort of greenery, drive parking, all those types of things. And then I also just want to sort of remind folks that this project for the public art portion of Abolitionist Place is part of like a larger ecosystem of projects that are part of In Pursuit of Freedom, which is exploring Brooklyn's anti-slavery and abolitionist movements through performance, through exhibitions, through talks, through research, through a bunch of different avenues. And so the public art portion that I'm working on is just one of many things that have been done around this project In Pursuit of Freedom to advance both Brooklyn's anti-slavery movement history and to remind folks of what has happened here and what we are sort of posed to do as we advance into the future. Another update that I wanted to share is that many of you guys may have remembered that originally the site was called Willoughby Square. It was made public on June 17, 2021, so about 6 or 7 months ago, that the location has been renamed as Abolitionist Place. And so that is in honor of the abolitionist history in that area and the larger abolitionist history of Brooklyn. So again, no more Willoughby Square. We are now calling it Abolitionist Place. And so I want to jump straight into this because I think that it's good to be upfront about what's going on here. So I want to jump immediately into an overview of concerns that have been expressed about the public art portion of this project, and in particular, what I have sort of offered as the proposal. So I think it's always good to start at this place of I love critique. This is really exciting for me, and I'm really excited to be part of this process where I get to hear from people about the things that they're feeling about the project and about my contribution. So let's actually just get started. Let's hop in there. So basically what I did in terms of trying to be attuned to listening to what folks are saying and what people are sharing, I went through all the articles that have been published about this project, folks who have been talking about it, and decided like I would just go ahead and just like, let's pull this out. Let's get into it, right? And so one article, this is from a 2021 article in New York Times, and just states that preservationists and activists who for 20 years have pushed the city to honor Brooklyn's abolitionist roots were displeased with Ms. Rasheed, that's me, designs complaining they were too abstract at a time when women and people of color are fighting to see themselves figuratively represented in New York's monuments. And so I sort of took this as a note of like, okay, here's one concern that folks have: a desire for figurative work and the belief in the power of representation to create change. Folks are concerned about not having a figurative representational image of some of the folks who are very pivotal in this movement and are interested in seeing the faces as sculptures, as bodies of work that people can identify as figurative bodies. There's also a belief that the community engagement portion of this project is both fake and the resulting work will be meaningless. So this was a tweet that was reminding people to register for tonight. Thanks. I'm really excited that folks were able to come out. And so this person is concerned that indeed the community engagement process, which I take very seriously, is both fake and that the resulting work that I create will be a meaningless monument. So that's another concern. There's also concern around co-opting abolitionist rhetoric. So there's a concern about to what extent this project and me are trying to co-opt abolitionist rhetoric, trying to co-opt abolitionist language, and co-opt abolitionist history in the pursuit of something else. So this is a concern that people have. Another concern that's surfacing is a concern, which is a belief that EDC and Kameelah, that's me, are the same people, or that in some way that I'm a puppet for EDC. So you can see in these two tweets, folks are concerned about the sort of irony of the EDC being involved in an abolition study group without recognizing the EDC and I are not the same people, that I'm the person designing this engagement. Yeah, and so this is another concern. To what extent is Kameelah a puppet for the EDC? Another concern that has been expressed is the notion that the work is about jails and prisons. The work is not about jails and prisons. And we'll get into that a little bit later with regard to an excerpt on the page that sort of noted some foundational theory around thinking through the notions of abolition. Another concern that has been expressed is that me as an artist is too sort of caught up in art world mystification and not paying attention to other possibilities, and that I just am not the right person for this project at all. Another concern that's been expressed is that the abstraction of the work is a problem, and that me as an artist is not invested in real change, and that I'm more focused on making work that I just happen to like versus trying to do something that will impact society. Another concern that was expressed was that I'm out of touch and I don't understand the situation, and that there is hope that eventually I will be able to speak more appropriately and clearly about my project and the implications. Additionally, there's a concern that me as a Black woman, that I'm just a pawn to get people to shut up and not be upset about me being chosen. So there's lots of concerns. And so I love critique. I love concerns, but I really love informed critique even better. And so what I'm hoping to do tonight is not to petition for your like of me or the project, but just to actually inform folks a bit more about what the project is designed around and the ideas that are important, as well as the community engagement process. So I see people are raising their hands, but again, I'm not addressing raised hands. If you have a question, you put it in the Q&A section so that we can make sure that we're responding to everyone's questions in a queue. So I want to go into a quick overview of me, the artist, because I think it's important to ground this in sort of how I think about my art practice, but also how I think about the world in relation to public history, as well as the way I think about the world in relation to learning and education. So I'll make this quick because in a lot of ways this is and is not about me. I'm going to show a quick couple excerpts of my work and my practice that has been in public spaces as a way to give some insight into the way in which this work has functioned and is continuing to work, and how I hope to integrate this into the future aspects of this project. So this is from North Little Rock, Arkansas, through a project for Freedoms, where the ask is sort of to think about a question that would be important for people to think about as we were thinking through this election period, but also as we were thinking about the future of where we are going and the importance of education in that context. So I designed a billboard that was focused on the ways in which it was important to think about not only what we've learned in a given context, but also what we are unlearning. There's also this project that happened in Brooklyn Museum back in 2020 as well, which was sort of thinking through this question of close reading and the importance of closely reading history and closely reading primary sources as an invitation not to just absorb and to ingest information, but to also sort of think through what it is that you're ingesting and how that bits of information can impact how you make sense of the world. There's this project at the Brooklyn Public Library, which was an invitation for people to use the library space as a space of wandering, where they can sort of encounter things and ideas that they had not previously been interested in through these sort of scores. And then we had tons of public programming where we brought strangers together to create things together. And the idea there was to think about opportunities for co-learning and what can happen when people are working together in particular contexts to develop ideas and to create a body of work. This is the Venice Biennial in Venice, and it is a banner that's about 30 feet long that reads, "Are we there yet?" And I was really interested in questions around the ways in which there is an assumption that we have achieved all that we need to achieve in terms of racial equity and gender equity, et cetera, and sort of posing this question: to what extent are we there yet? But who is the we? What is the there? And what does yet look like? These were a series of banners that were also inside Brooklyn Museum that are asking questions around sort of the utility of notions of hope, asking questions around sort of the redundancy of certain injustices that continuously happen in society. And again, I'm really invested in sort of thinking about questions because I don't think that it's as important to be didactic to tell someone what to think, but I am interested in posing questions or prompting people to sort of think through history on their own terms versus telling them what they should believe, but providing opportunities for exploration. A similar project looking at prepositions at Brooklyn Museum. This project, Selling My Black Rage to the Highest Bidder, was really invested in thinking about the ways in which political movements, particularly Black political movements, have become commodified and co-opted either for marketing, either for corporations, but also certainly by people who are really invested in taking kernels of history and using them in their own ways in order to advance their own personal or larger political goals. And so I was interested in this notion of selling an intangible and what might it mean to prompt people to engage in this process. And so people were invited to call this number and to place a bid, and then leave messages also organized around to what extent the selling of Black rage was a tangible process, but also what people expected they would receive in this process of purchasing Black rage. This is from a project called How to Suffer Politely and Other Etiquette, which was developed during a time period where there was increased visibility around state violence towards Black folks, particularly by police officers, and is interested in sort of the ways in which affect is policed, having certain expectations on how Black people should express their emotions, how Black people should express rage, anger, how Black people even make sense of their own history. So this notion of asking people to suffer politely, promising someone else comfort and in exchange for your discomfort, because presumably someone else's comfort is significantly more important than actually advancing social justice. And so the banners, this is in Glasgow, and this has been around the United States as well as in Europe. It reads, purchase the proper boots with which to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, tell your struggle with triumphant humor, take it like a man, but don't take it up with the man, and lower the pitch of your suffering. And so again, I'm really interested in text-based practices and processes because I deeply understand the history of Black folks in relation to literacy, in relation to language, in relation to words. I'm interested in the ways in which words can be used in public space to illuminate certain ideas in ways that other forms of artwork just cannot. This is from a project called An Alphabetical Accumulation of Approximate Observations, which was sort of exploring ways in which humor and sort of these short alliterative statements can help us sort of condense and consolidate some contemporary concerns around apathy or concerns around sort of political upheaval. And so there are about 200 or 300 of these. This exhibit only showed about 30 of them. And so I was interested again in text-based work, but also thinking about the role that humor plays in my text-based practice. And this is literally a carving into a wall at a gallery in Los Angeles. This is a flag-based work that was at Ballroom Marfa in Marfa, Texas. And this work was part of a show called Unflagging, where we were asked to sort of think about the other purposes of a flag. If something is supposed to interact with the wind and fly in the air, what are other things it can say and do other than assign or announce a national identity? And I think this is the final example before I talk directly about the proposal. This was at BAM for Martin Luther King Day back in 2021. I think so. And we were asked to sort of reflect on the history of Martin Luther King's legacy. And I decided to include this excerpt or this piece of work called Read the Fine Print. I think a lot of times in our inquiry around history in particular, sometimes we go for the big highlights or the big headlines, and there are important parts of fine print that are really important and vital for us to explore. And so this prompt to read the fine print was sort of pointing at a couple of things, particularly Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 letter from the Birmingham jail, where he talks about the sort of danger of white moderates and their attempts to control the timing of revolution, the timing of movements, the methods of movements. And so I think there's something really important about the ways in which particularly Black historical figures have been taken out of context and sort of used and quoted and misquoted and sort of excerpted and sort of polished to meet certain political ends or political ideas. And my interest in pushing back in relation to reading the fine print, in relation to reading closely, to actually say, let's slow down. What were they actually saying, and to what ways have we co-opted what's being said for our own personal gain? And so with that being said, I want to jump right into actually looking at the proposal overview. For folks who may or may not be aware, there is a process for this. It's been a very long process, but it's taught me a lot, both about how these local processes work, and then sort of just like the politics of and the entirety of public art as a whole. And so it's been a very educative experience for me. So I'm going to jump right into the proposal, where I'm going to talk about the locations of the work and some of the proposals for materials and things of that sort, talk about community engagement, and then I'm going to start looking at these questions. Alrighty. So again, here's an image of the park, or of Abolitionist Place, rather, just so we can have like a visual reminder again. And as I stated before, I was really interested in this park, in this location, as a space where many bits of sort of important information and prompts could be sort of dispersed throughout the space. So instead of having one location where everything is, thinking about the entire space as sort of a compositional field where many things can happen. And so I want to sort of start here with some important language, which is that this is part of a larger body of work, right? Called In Pursuit of Freedom. And pursuit means that we're still chasing after something, right? And so what's important for me as I'm thinking about this work is thinking about the way in which this work is not done, right? Slavery as an institution was abolished, right? You cannot technically, well, except if you're incarcerated, you cannot technically enslave someone, right? We cannot do that. However, the systems and structures which undergird slavery as a system, the racism, all those things still exist. And so reminding ourselves that when we think about In Pursuit of Freedom, In Pursuit of these things, we're thinking through like, what is the unfinished work? What is the work that's still being done? How does the legacy of those who've come before us inform the work that we need to continue to do? So it's not about a particular moment in history, but about how that particular moment in history has also informed our contemporary time. Again, I'm not responding to raise hands. If you have a question, you can put in the Q&A. I cannot respond to raise hands because I'm speaking right now. But if you put in the Q&A, I will respond to it. So there are a couple of folks that I want to highlight before I get into that. So the first one is an excerpt from Audre Lorde's Learning from the 60s speech at Harvard University, where she's sort of talking about how important it is not to be seduced by one particular moment in history. And so she writes, as Black people, if there's one thing we can learn from the 60s is how infinitely complex any move for liberation must be. For we must move against not only those forces which dehumanize us from the outside, but also against those oppressive values which we have been forced to take into ourselves. Through examining the combination of our triumphs and errors, we can examine the dangers of an incomplete vision, not to condemn that vision, but to alter it, construct templates for possible futures, and focus our rage for change upon our enemies rather than upon each other. And so I'm providing this excerpt because I think one of the things that has been deeply important for me in this process is, again, not to be fixated on one particular moment in history, but to think about history as something that is interconnected, is ecosystemic. So what am I learning from this particular movement around abolition, around the end of slavery, as specific to Brooklyn history, but also how does that inform how I make sense of today, right? And so many times as I'm like reading these older speeches, I think about the ways in which these folks must have been so tired of saying the same things to everyone. Like, we have to learn from the past, we have to learn from the past. And it's not this rote reminder to learn from the past for like just basic life day-to-day edification, but it is to say, again, the work is not finished. And if the work is not finished, what does that mean for what we still have in front of us now? I also want to bring in this excerpt from Ruthie Gilmore, who is an abolitionist who talks a lot about the sort of relationship between the carceral politics of prisons and geography within the US. And she writes, abolition is about abolishing the conditions under which prison became the solution to problems, rather than abolishing the buildings we call prisons. And I always like coming back to this quote because I think in a lot of ways, when we think about abolition, we immediately say, oh, like we're done because slavery is over. Like there's not slavery, but all the systems and structures that made slavery possible, that made slavery legitimate, which made slavery seem like it was okay to do. We have not abolished racism. We have not abolished anti-Blackness. We have not abolished so many systems and structures that actually have permitted and allowed slavery to continue. And so in this way, this work also riffs off of this to actually say like, abolition was not about just like closing down plantations. Like we still had to still deal with sharecropping in many areas of the country. And so I think that this is a reminder again, that this is not about the work of ending something symbolically, but actually what is the work to change structures and systems. And so again, I want to remind us again that the work is not done. In Pursuit of Freedom means that we are pursuing it. It is not freedom is achieved. Here is a monument to freedom achieved. It is in pursuit of freedom. What does the pursuit look like? And what are the questions that we need to think through? And I also just want to bring us back to just a reminder around the importance of Black textual production and Black language and Black writing in terms of the ways that we make sense of Black history, but also Black liberation. And so we know that Ida B. Wells is an important part of Brooklyn's abolitionist history. And the reason why I mentioned Ida B. Wells here is that she was a wordsmith. Her work was through language. She understood the importance of working through the media as a tool to get information out, but also understood the importance of rhetoric and language. And so as I think about this project, as I think about several of the folks who have been involved with abolitionist work, the slave narratives that have been written, the speeches that have been written, the manifestos that have been written, at the core of this is an interest in literacy and what writing and language mean in terms of liberation, what writing and language mean in terms of education, but what writing and literature mean in terms of creating a literal space, a sphere to imagine otherwise. And so let's actually get into what stuff is gonna look like. So this is the black and white schematic image of the same abolitionist place image that we saw before. And as you'll see, there are three components. There's the entrance sculpture, there's the undulating seating with relief text, and there's the undulating seating with, oops, prayer alarm, my apologies. There's an undulating seating with the water jet metal cut text. And so all the yellow is identifying where things are located. And then I'll talk through each of these. So again, there's this entrance sculpture. We don't know what it looks like yet. This is why community engagement is important, because part of what we want to figure out is what are people thinking about. And so for that entrance, large freestanding sculpture, that has not been decided on. We are using the community programming and public programming as an opportunity to generate the language and ideas around what that'll actually look like. Again, not responding to raised hands. Next, there's this undulating sort of seated step area. With that being said, there's a bunch of sort of notes to make about the actual makeup of the space. As you'll see in this sort of more detailed schematic image here, it's a seated area that has a bit of a recess in there, just for drainage and other purposes. And you'll see that the questioning artwork is actually placed up against the area where someone might sit or place their back. And we're using a mosaic relief as this reference image. And we're still thinking through colors and things of that sort. But we know for certain that we are using this undulating area as a place-to-place language and text and questions that are sort of prompting us around abolitionist histories and futures. Also sort of thinking about the texture and the style, as was noted before, it is important to sort of think about the importance of literacy and text and language in the history of Black folks throughout the world, but particularly in relation to slavery and the refusal to allow Black people to read and write. And so one of the things that was really important for me was sort of investigating ways of rendering the text and the language in ways that were reminiscent of both sort of vernacular handwriting, but also of topography and text that may have been reminiscent of that particular time in history. So there are a couple of places to pull some inspiration in terms of typefaces. There's a Friedman torchlight, there's a ram horn. The ram's horn, I think what's really interesting to sort of think about in this context is that a lot of Black newspapers, both at this time, but also even in contemporary times, not only function as a tool to disseminate information, but they were designed as a tool to teach literacy. So you'll see a lot of papers that have alphabets and other things that are designed to actually promote literacy, again, because there is a focus on the role of education, the role of literacy, the role of the written and spoken word as part of liberatory struggles. There's also this publication called Black News, which I found in the digital archive of the Brooklyn Public Library. And it is a newspaper that was really focused, or a publication or a newsletter that was in the 60s and 70s and was invested in sort of thinking about the interplay between Black publication and Black publishing and liberation struggles. And so thinking about the vernacular handwriting and the typefaces here as inspiration for the text that is throughout the park. And thinking about sort of the choice and thinking through relief structures, just as a reminder of thinking through how we think about the relationship between different sculptural planes, and the idea of a relief structure being an invitation to not only think about art in these spaces and taking on that sort of element of a relief, but also thinking about the actual concepts around notions of relief, the ways in which, in order to create a relief sculpture, requires a certain amount of sort of carving in and digging, and what that helps us sort of think through as sort of a practice of carving in and digging and thinking through our history. Again, I don't decide on this. This is what I would like to talk to people about through our community engagement. And so as frequently as you can, I would love to have people show up to public programming, which is all remote for now because of our COVID situation, so that we can learn more about what language folks think is most important to be in this location. And then finally, we'll get to these last 4 sections, 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D. And so there is an interest in thinking again about other ways for the text to be displayed throughout the location. We also were looking at water jet cut as a methodology, thinking about the detail that is possible, the gradation that is possible, and using that again as a method for rendering the text in these locations. And again, here are some images, sort of like as an inspiration for thinking about layout and design and things of that sort. Again, nothing is final because that's what we have public programming for. And then finally, I want to wrap up here, which is sort of thinking about notions around what it means for us to all be working together for this project. And so for the community engagement overview, there are a couple things. A press release went out last week that had several dates. And I know some people were like, well, it's on Monday. I didn't get enough notice. Yeah, I know. That's why I put in a second date. And part of what's going to happen today is if folks tell me I need to have more dates, and I will make myself available as many times as folks need me to be available. So that's the fixed schedule in terms of today. We have the session. In another week or two, we will have another session just like this. There's also the opportunity to do self-scheduling. So there's a Google form to share your ideas. You can send me an email. You can call this number and leave a message. You can visit Calendly to set up a time for you or your organization to speak with me directly. If you want to talk to me, I want to talk to you. And then finally, we have the Abolition Study Group. This is an opportunity for us to sort of think about some foundational history around Brooklyn and abolition struggles, and then to also sort of think through what is this language of abolition? How are we thinking about it in contemporary context? What new work do we have to do? And so for anyone who signed up to the session, prior to the session actually opening, you'll be sent the readings. We might have guest speakers, we'll see. It's all a scheduling thing right now. But right now it's an invitation for folks to have a free will and conversation and to brainstorm some ideas for Abolitionist Place. Yeah, so that is the description. This is what we have. What I'm gonna do is we're gonna jump straight into Q&A. So I see that we already have 10 questions. So let me open them up and see what we have. All righty. First question from Jacob Morris. Are you aware, period, that the EDC in their design of the park has placed a dog run directly over the tunnels of the freedom-seeking Blacks used to escape from slavery? Do you feel that is disturbing or disrespectful? I did not design the park, so I did not design the park. Raul, hi, Kameelah. You mentioned that this when you were speaking to the Public Design Commission. What's most important for me in engaging, for me as I'm engaged with history, is not thinking about recasting and just providing an archive, but thinking about the questions and the context and the power relations that animate how we make sense of history and who actually is involved in telling the history. But the whole reason the city created the Pursuit of Freedom is because the city tried and failed to confiscate 227 Duffield, now 227 Abolitionist Place. Can you please mention how the fight over the Economic Development Corporation's failure to confiscate, can you please mention how the fight over the EDC's failure to confiscate her home, that question is not complete. It's a failure to dismiss her history and a success to destroy the affordable housing and Black-owned business. Raul, if you can reframe your question, I would love to answer it, but I'm a bit confused because the question gets cut off. It says, can you please mention how the fight over EDC's failure to confiscate her home, question mark. Put it back in there, please clarify. I'll be more than happy to share it. Someone says, sorry, not a question. Thanks for sharing your work. I love it. Looking forward to seeing the outcome of this project. Wonderful. Hi, Trisha. Thanks for sharing your portfolio. Are you able to share what you have in mind for Abolitionist Place? Trisha, what in specific would you like for me to share? Just put in there. Todd, is a memorial the place to indicate where the abolitionist work failed in your view? Why not center the work on their experiences? Is the memorial the place to indicate? I didn't mention failure, so I'm a bit confused there. Why not center the work on their experiences? It is centered on their experiences, but if you would like to clarify, please clarify. And can you please describe the process by which you were selected as the artist for the project, presumably by the EDC, and the process by which your ideas for creating a memorial to Black abolitionist history in Brooklyn are being considered, and by whom? Specifically, are you taking community feedback in your design ideas into consideration? I heard you say you were interested in text-based work, but if people preview your plan and still feel it's too abstract, are you willing to consider? Please note that I have personally not yet formed an opinion, as I have not yet seen your plan. Hi, Anne. Thanks for your question. So the process basically is that artists were invited to submit proposals. We had to do a presentation. We submitted our proposals. It was narrowed down by a committee of community members, which did include folks from EDC, but from several, from the community board too, as well as several different organizations in Brooklyn. And after those 5 finalists presented, which included me, I was selected. After that process, that was in late 2019, early 2020. After that process, as you all know, COVID hit and everything got stalled. We restarted this engagement when we felt it was safe to both restart this engagement, and we had more clarity on what the city was doing in terms of everything being halted when we had that information. The process by which my ideas were being considered. So like I said, that was a team of folks in Brooklyn who were from every organization, from Okada to a range of other organizations, including folks on the EDC. And then, yes, I am taking feedback on all the design ideas. So as I stated at the end, there are about 6 or 7 different ways to get in contact with me. And because of that, I'm really excited for folks to be engaged with me. So if you have feedback, yes, I would like to hear it. This is why we have this session. This is why we have future sessions. This is why when I presented, when folks said it was too abstract, I was like, well, there's no text yet because I didn't want to make that decision before I have the opportunity to speak with the community. And so this is where we actually fill those things in together. And then, okay, great. Shawnee Lee, greetings, Sister Kameelah. Have you studied the history of downtown Brooklyn, in particular Metro Tech? Yes. Did you have a more specific question about what you were interested in, what I thought? Please put it in there. Trisha, are you open to feedback on your proposal? It would be really nice to see the art that reflects the history of abolition in the actual place where the art will be shown. Are you familiar with the abolitionist history of 227 Abolitionist Place, with the community activists and abolitionists who continue to fight? Yes, I am. As I just said, Trisha, I'm more than happy to get feedback, which is why we've had 6 different methods for people to provide feedback and to be part of the process. Yes, Jacob, I am very aware of the Freedom of the Sisters in Freedom Memorial proposal. Todd, what stories of the history of abolitionism in Brooklyn do you want to tell? I didn't see any of that in your proposal. Again, I would love for people to come out to the actual community engagement events so that people can actually share with me what they think is most important. As I already shared in the presentation, I'm thinking about the histories of Black textual production in relation to abolitionist history, which were rooted around thinking about the importance of literacy, media, and journalism, and both spreading the word about the importance of abolition, but also in creating a sort of culture of literacy so that people could access information and to be able to read and analyze on their own. Shawnee Lee, are you familiar with whom Mama Joy is and her importance to Abolitionist Place here? Yes. Chicha, no question. I just want to say how much I appreciate your willingness to engage so constructively with the critiques that are being raised. Thanks. Jacob, by your dismissal of the dog run disrespectful design issue, do you feel complicit with EDC? As I explained in the presentation before, I am not EDC. I am Kameelah Janan Rasheed, daughter of Gwendolyn Rasheed. I cannot offer more to you than that. As I stated before, again, I really want to answer questions about the ideas. I really want to answer questions about what people want to see. I really want to answer questions about other things that I can be doing to talk to people. So if people have questions about that, I would love, 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 love to hear those. Right now, we've had 15 questions. You guys can keep putting in questions. More than happy to keep reading them. More than happy to hang out as those questions are being read. What are other folks thinking about? Rolla, I don't understand your question. You're concerned that I didn't mention Mama Joy in the introduction. Introduction to what? Todd, fine. The questions about your ideas had a one sentence response. Yep. And my response was to you and to everyone else that I'm very excited for people to come out to public programming so that I can hear from everyone about what they think is important to include. So like I've said before in several proposals, like I've said here today, and how, as I will continue to say, that when the project was proposed, I intentionally did not fill in language. I intentionally did not say that this is exactly how it's supposed to be, because I was happily and deeply invested in actually talking to people about the ideas that they wanted to see in this location. So again, Todd, my response only had one sentence because I literally was asking, what do people want to see? That was the question back at you. I wrote the whole project was a way for NYC to save face after they tried and failed to confiscate Mama Joy's home. You say you're interested in context, but you ignore how destroying. I didn't ignore anything. This is untrue. And again, what is your actual question? What would you like for me to respond to? I'm concerned that you didn't mention Mama Joy in your introduction. I didn't mention a lot of people in my introduction. I didn't mention a lot of people. Is there another question here? Hi, Charlotte. I appreciate your ability to not allow the art to be a lightning rod for discontinuing of elements of the design and process. Thank you for engaging us on your ideas and concepts and the artwork. Larry Weeks, your thoughts are interesting, but I do not get the history of abolitionist movement and the torture of lynching and segregation. Larry, what do you think is the best way to show the history of abolitionist movement and the torture of lynching and segregation? What is your suggestion? Thank you, Ro. I'm so happy that you're here because of Mama Joy's activism. That's really exciting. I'm happy that you're here. Todd, I would be making it. I'm the artist that is commissioned. So I would be the person that's creating this. Shawnee Lee, what exactly would you like to know? Todd, you can go to my website, kameelah.com. Millard Owens, my daughter has no place in all of Brooklyn to see, experience abolitionism and Black women suffragists. Why the literary emphasis here versus abolitionism as action, commitment, defiant civil disobedience? I feel no passion in your plans. Yes, in you, but not in what your plans are conveying. I'm sorry, Millard, that you cannot see passion. I don't know how to help you with that. May just be a difference in how we express and demonstrate affect. Why the literary emphasis here versus abolition as action, commitment, defiance? So there's no verses, right? If we understand the history of slavery and the history of literacy in relation to Black people in America, and specifically during the time of enslavement, the literal act of knowing how to read and producing literature and producing text that actually is advancing a different version of the world is action. There's no actual competition, right? Civil disobedience also shows up in the fact that someone risks their life repeatedly to publish information about the desperate situations and risk their life to do that. So again, this is an opportunity for us to all think about why the assumption is that action only looks like a particular thing. Victoria, it's clear from the community, it's clear that the community is feeling a lot of anxiety with this project because of past bad experience with EDC. That is like, okay, but please again, this is one thing I would really like to emphasize. I want to emphasize it again and again and again and again, because this seems to be, Jacob, I'm not taking raise hands, thank you. This seems to be an issue over and over and over, which is that I am not the EDC. I'm Kameelah Janan Rasheed. I existed before and separate from the EDC. I proposed something. That project was accepted. I am not the EDC. And I think it's really important for people to understand me as an individual. And I find extreme irony in this conversation, particularly because we're talking about Black liberation, Black abolition, notions of fighting against the things that shouldn't be. But there's an assumption that I, as a Black woman, have no agency to make decisions or have no ability to have an agentive conversation, right? And so I'm still a person. I have opinions. I still have feelings about the world. And so keeping in mind again that when you're asking questions, I can't speak for the EDC. I'm not the EDC. I can speak for Kameelah Janan Rasheed, daughter of Gwendolyn Rasheed. That's all I can do. That's literally all I can do. And so again, I cannot tell you how about bad experience with EDC. I'm not the EDC. So going on with your question, Victoria, how do you plan to ameliorate those concerns to the community and how we perceive the space should reflect our history? Do we have veto power over specific design concerns? So what's interesting about this question is that we are conflating doing what someone is telling me they want me to do with listening to community. The community is larger than the people that are in this room. The community is larger than the people who may send me an email. That you are not the only people who represent this community. So like you may be one person that's like, I'm feeling lots of anxiety about this, and someone else may not feel any anxiety about this. That means I do have to listen to everyone. And so I think the larger question is like, what if someone else from the community comes in and says, hey, I like this. Then what? Then what's the next step there? This isn't a process of, well, because someone said that they don't like it, then Kameelah goes back and then makes something different. That's not how these projects work. And keeping in mind again that I have agency. I'm a human being with agency, right? And so that means that also as I'm making the work, I, as the artist, am making the work. And we also have to think about how public artworks functions. There's a history of public art projects, a history of frustration about these things. But at the end of the day, we also recognize that the artist still has to have voice in the production of this work. And again, this is why I keep saying over and over, I do want to know what people want me to do, which is why I'm inviting people to give me feedback. So someone's like, it would be really great if there was a question or there was text about this, or if we could think about the freestanding structure doing X, Y, and Z. I'm listening. This is not a refusal of listening. What I'm saying is that still at the end of the day, I'm the artist that has to sit down and construct this. And so I also need to be on the same page with everyone. Salima, I love the idea of focusing on literacy piece of the abolition movement. Are the pieces rotated over the years? So yes, this is one thing that we've been talking about too, is to what extent we can think through structures that allow for rotation and change over time, because we recognize that texts and questions are not always evergreen. And so we want to be mindful of change over time. Todd, does the focus on literacy possibly diminish the fact that there was a highly educated free Black population in New York City and Brooklyn? Nope, it doesn't. Millard Owens, yes, absolutely. Literacy for Black folks is vital for our liberation, but it is the context of broader action in which your plans do not convey. Are you open to altering your plans to incorporate something broader than the literary focus? Yeah, so I feel like we're getting the same question here, which is asking me to what extent I want to get feedback. And I've said I would love feedback. Yes, that is the answer to all the questions that are asking to what extent I want feedback. The answer is yes, which is why I've made myself available to get feedback. Tricia, my first question was written before you shared your proposal. Thanks for taking our questions. I'm curious about how you relate to Brooklyn itself and how you feel about gentrification in Brooklyn. So I'm from East Palo Alto, which is in the Bay Area of California. And my family was part of the gentrification that happened in the Bay Area, and East Palo Alto in particular, which resulted in our houselessness. So of course I don't feel great about gentrification in any context that displaces people. Evo Rob, are there other projects that dissatisfied people can work on? I think this is a great question. And I think it's also a reminder that this project has a long life and there will be other opportunities to keep participating in this work, and that this project is not the only thing about Brooklyn's abolitionist history that will ever exist in the world. I think there's some anxiety, which I understand, but I also want to just be like very mindful of the fact that this isn't the only thing about Brooklyn abolitionist history that will exist in Brooklyn. It just isn't. It can't be. It won't be. And that there's tons of opportunity to think about public programming. There's tons of opportunity to think about collaboration. There's just tons of opportunity. And so I want this to be less of, oh man, I don't want this particular thing, and more of like, how can we actually talk to one another and figure out what works best for this space? And Fawcett, is it possible that the final designs will include both word and structural representational, specifically honoring Black women suffragists? Do you also create this kind of art? Thanks for engaging in this conversation and your willingness to engage in future dialogue. Love dialogue. And so again, please come to community programming. Guys, I'm flexible. I think I'm a pretty chill person. I think I'm pretty good at taking feedback. And if people have ideas, then like, why not just reach out to me and say, hey, can we have a conversation? There's a link on the website that will allow for people to literally set up a private meeting with me. If they want to talk to me for 6 hours, I will sit and listen to you for 6 hours. Just click the link and we can have a conversation. Todd, how can people give recommendations on the sculpture without any information about the former materials? So it's a catch-22, right? So the first complaints were that I decided everything and it wasn't fair because I decided everything, the community couldn't get involved. Then it was that it's not enough information for the community to get involved. We can't have it both ways. It was intentionally left unfinished because I wanted to get feedback. And so when I ask questions like about textures and materials and colors, I literally am saying I'm open to someone saying, you know what, actually, I don't think this needs to look like this. Like, let's try a different material. Let's try a different process. Let's try a different structure. But again, we have to actually be okay with a certain level of discomfort around the ways in which this process has to be open to the possibility that there may be some ambiguity at a moment where we're still trying to figure out what things look like. Clarification, are you open to not only receiving feedback, but actually process? Honestly, I'm not hearing any indication of actual, Millard, I can't help you with how you're feeling right now. I'm sorry. I think that people who know me as a person who's worked with me know that I'm very good at taking feedback. But you'll have to just talk to me and learn that about me. But I can't help you here in this session if you don't feel that that's something you're going to have to process on your own time. Ariana, I have the opposite question to Todd, focusing on access. I'm wondering if there will be any ways for your beautiful message to be heard by people with visual impairments and kids who have not learned to read. I think it's a great question. So we have tons of different possibilities for that, right? We can think about having accessible Braille for folks as well. We can also think about the community programming and public programming that goes on with the opening of the park. And ways that we can sort of think about texture as indicative or educative. I think we have a lot of options, and I would love to hear, Ariana, more from you about what other ideas you have around access, because I think it's not only about visual impairment or kids who have not learned to read. We've also heard questions around like translation as well, which I think is a great question to bring up. Other questions, keep them coming. Let's see. Sarah, I appreciate the generosity of this discussion. I also appreciate your kindness in the space of being baited. I would like to ask if there are any signature materials that resonate for you, or if people should suggest materials that activate their thinking. Ooh, let me come back to that. I like this question. Let me think about some things that activate my thinking, but I'm going to come right back to it. Let me see these other questions and then I'll think about that. Oh, hi, Steve. You're probably just signed into someone else's. Let's see. Let me see what I missed. Raul, talking about downtown Brooklyn 19th century Black history takes much more than 6 hours. It deserves a whole university dedicated to it. The Color Convention movement shows that this is transforming discussion on civil rights history. Yes, I used to be a high school teacher and currently a professor. I understand education and how learning works. I know that it'll take more than 6 hours. I was just using 6 hours as a marker of like, I will sit and listen to someone share with me their ideas for 6 hours. So if you sign up for a 6 hour slot and you find out that 6 hours is not enough, you can just sign up for as many more slots as you want. And I will be sitting by the phone waiting for you. Hi, Salima. Not sure if I missed the timeline. Can you explain that, please? I think the community would be at ease if they knew that info. Thank you for that question. So as we know, COVID has changed the timeline for a lot of things, so we're pushing things back. We have another stage of proposals to go through, which are happening in the spring of this year, which will give us more updates on the timeline. We've been trying to stay flexible to ensure that we're not taking any shortcuts. And so we're shooting hopefully for the top of 2023, but things can always change. And during this process, again, I think it's important to remain agile and flexible and able to like take feedback and change course if need be, which is why, again, I'm really encouraging people to come to the programming. I want to come back to Steve's question. Signature materials that resonate with you. I'm going to think about this more. Yeah, I mean, I've been rereading a lot of Ida B. Wells' speeches because I am really invested in the way that she talks about the importance of rhetoric and data. I've been really interested in how her work has been squarely focused and sort of intersects with Du Bois's work around sort of finding ways to best represent inequity through numbers, sort of thinking about what is the best language for people to understand the severity of a situation. And so, yeah, I would think about Ida B. Wells' speeches where she's specifically talking about the importance of statistics. And she has this very interesting point where she's talking about how important the press and the media is in sort of helping us make sense of the world, but she also talks about the difficulty for Black publications to have the resources to go out and collect the information. And so how important it is for her to not only be the person who's carrying forth these messages, but trying to develop methodologies around collecting statistical information. And so I actually find the ways in which that she presents statistical information to be really interesting in terms of trying to think through how we're representing what change looks like, but also how we're representing how we articulate what a particular moment is looking like in terms of like our frustration. We're at time, but let me scroll up. Let's see if I've missed anything. Let's see. Jacob, not taking your baits, but thanks. Aaliyah, how will your project reflect the fact that EDC spent the last 20 years demolishing physical spaces and is now sponsoring an art installation in exactly the same location? How does your project take this duplicity in consideration? So the irony of this question is two things, right? The first thing is that on one hand, folks are saying that, hey, Kameelah, you should not be the person who's doing that. But at the same time, people are putting at my feet that this project should do multiple things. This project should represent the entirety of abolitionist history in Brooklyn. This project should also be an indictment of EDC. This project should also be a monument to this person. This project can't do 5,000 things. And to the extent that this project will reflect the fact that EDC did these things, right? What do you actually want this location to be? Do you want it to be about this, which is stated here, that the EDC did X, Y, and Z? Or do you want it to be about the actual abolitionist history? Because what I'm hearing now is that you want both things. And I can't do both things. So I am quite interested in sort of like what's being laid at my feet here in terms of what is being asked of me and what people think is my responsibility, right? The commission for me was to create something that responded to and reflected abolitionist history, but your question is asking for me to do something entirely different. So yeah, I'm just really interested in how people are framing what their expectations are of me at this time and what their expectations of what this location does. And I think as we're wrapping up, I think one thing that's really, really important to think about is like, this project can't do everything. A monument is not going to create material justice for everyone. A monument doesn't have that power. It is a tool that can educate, it's a tool that can bring attention, but all the work that we're talking about here in terms of bringing information around this or bringing information around that is not happening through the park. That's about actually how we organize around other issues, how we organize even in addition to the park. And so I think, again, what it feels like to me is that a lot of people have a lot of expectations about what this one location can do. And then they're asking for me to answer all those questions and do all those things. And I'm one person, but I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to change course and I'm willing to hear from people. But we can only do this if A, we can be respectful to each other as we're going through these processes, and B, also that I'm being respected in this process as well as a person with agency and as a person who was selected to do this. So again, I really appreciate that everyone came. There'll be another opportunity on February 7th. Sam, let me get to your question. The access and erasure of art representing Black identity and resistance is very minimal in this part of Brooklyn, unfortunately capitalized by institutions of harm. This unfortunately places Black artists in a divided state to be true to the work and also acknowledging of land also colonialist practices. I ask that in moving this piece to challenge and open access to resistance and reclaiming of land and those who honored it, past and present. Okay, I don't think that we're in conflict there. I wouldn't disagree with you. Thanks, Sam. Miller, so given your state of openness and the constructive critique that has been offered for months, can you share concretely some ways in which you've designed in which I guess you're saying in which your design has adjusted, appears to be exactly the same from what I heard months ago. It makes it hard for us to have confidence in the claims of openness. Again, I have no control over how you feel. That's for you to sort of process on your own time. But like I said, several times, that there are certain things that have already been decided. It's a text-based work. We will have a freestanding structure of some sort that will probably have text and other graphic elements on it. Those are things that have been decided. The content of that text, the location, the design of that, those are all subject to change, and I'm more than happy to get feedback. But I think this insistence that the only way that I can represent that I'm open is to completely change everything seems a bit absurd to me, to be quite honest. If we're talking about openness and dialogue, that means that both folks are opening and listening, right? So that means if you share something with me, I can take a little bit of that, but also that means that you have to take a little bit of what I'm sharing as a process, an idea as well. And so I'm hoping that through this continuous process together, we can actually figure out ways to actually engage in a process that allows for us to meet versus the notion that one of us will just do what the other person says. All righty. There's one more question. You said on January 19th, 2021, that you can't talk about all abolitionist history, but the RFP was about 19th century Brooklyn abolitionist history. That doesn't really appear in your proposal. Instead, you want to talk about structure and context, which is even huger than abolitionism. Yeah, I don't know how you would talk about history without context. I was just noting that we need context. How to suffer plight was kind of what you're asking the public. Oh, that's funny. Shouldn't debate be vibrant? This is the public project on public land using public money. So are we required to be polite? I don't think that anyone has yielded to politeness, so I'm a bit concerned here. There's some extreme irony in sort of the use of that particular project to bolster an argument here, because that project is actually about the ways in which white folks, particularly white liberals, try to control the ways in which Black people express history and express affect. So there's a bit of irony in your question here, but I do love a good ironic moment. So what I'm going to remind folks of now is that we are now done. It is 7 o'clock. It's a little over 7. I'm going to have some dinner. I suggest you all get some dinner for yourselves. Yeah, there will be another session on the 7th of February. Again, there are tons of other opportunities to engage with me. I will stick around for about 5 minutes if folks have additional questions. Otherwise, have a great evening, and I cannot wait to see you at future programming. Have a great night. Take care, folks. Bye. So for folks who are still here, Sam, I just saw your question. The best way to contact me is I'll put in the link for the website again. Give me 1 second. And the best way to contact me is to use that link. So, and the link that I'm about to share with you, it will include, give me 1 second. I just have to pull it up. 1 moment. 1 second, Sam. Sorry about that. All right, so let me drop this link in the chat for you. So, Sam, the best way to contact me is by using that link. That link has both my email address, a phone number, a Google form, a calendar link, and then links to registration for all future events. So please do contact me there. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to close this down. I hope everyone has a great evening. Get some food in your body and enjoy your evening. Shoot me an email or leave me a message or contact me any other way. Looking forward to hearing from you. Bye.
Recording stopped.